everyone, welcome. We're going to wait just a few moments before we go ahead and get started. We want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to join us and get settled. So while you're waiting, just sit back, relax, make sure you have a good cup of coffee in front of you, and we will get started momentarily. Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and get started, everyone. So welcome everyone to our Forward Food Collaborative webinar, The Plant-Based Solution to a Global Pandemic. My name is Amanda Trenchard, Senior Program Coordinator at the Humane Society of the United States, and today I'm joined by three incredible speakers: Karla Dumas, Director of Food and Nutrition at the Humane Society of the United States, Ron Hernandez, Managing Director of the Monday Campaigns, and Isaac Emery, Founder of Informed Sustainability Consulting. Today we have an exciting and jam-packed agenda for you. Karla is going to discuss the intersection of public health with animal products and offer up some easy and delicious plant-based menu ideas and grab-and-go concepts for you to implement at your institution. Next, Isaac is going to discuss the sustainability of animal foods versus plant-based foods, and Ron is going to offer up some best practices to help keep your customers engaged with plant-based eating and to help you continue promoting plant-based meals at your institution. So before we get started, just a few quick housekeeping items. First, this webinar will be recorded and sent to all registered attendees along with the presentation slide deck. Second, the last 30 minutes of this 1 hour, 30-minute webinar will be reserved for Q&A. So down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little Q&A button, and that is where you may submit your questions at any time throughout the presentation. So without further ado, Karla, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you all so much for being part of the webinar today. As Amanda mentioned, I'm the Director of Food Nutrition with the Humane Society of the United States. So I work with an incredible team of dietitians, chefs, and food nutrition specialists that probably work with some of you on the webinar today. And we work with dining operations within universities and higher education, K-12 programs, hospitals, and some of the largest food service management companies to increase the amount of plant-based options throughout your cycle menus. Now, we have been in existence for a little over, we have been in existence for a little over 10 years, and I'm struggling to move the slides here. There we go. Okay, but the last 5 years that we have been working, we have reached 530 culinary events, trained over 11,000 chefs and culinary staff, as well as healthcare staff, and worked directly with over 628 programs across the country. And that percentage that you're seeing there is based on those 628 programs, their cycle menus, what this looks like. So a little over 19% of the menus on average have meatless options, and 9.3% are entirely plant-based. So why is food changing? You might be thinking that this all sounds really great, and there are a variety of different reasons why food is changing. And of course, we're going to be addressing some of the issues with the food system that the global pandemic has brought about, but we've been seeing a shift over the last few years. And what we have seen is truly this incremental increase year after year of more plant-based meal options increasing everywhere. And what we know is that focusing on plant-based foods is not designed to meet the needs for a select group of people. Think those that identify as vegan or vegetarian, but that it's the mainstream population that is asking for more of these options. And what we know too is that manufacturers are beginning to understand this. And that's why they're focusing on omnivores as their consumers, not vegans and vegetarians. And when thinking about developing new products or what dining operations are focusing on, it is really focusing on the larger audience. And we have seen this over the last few years with what's happening within restaurants, specifically fast food restaurants. Many of you are probably aware that Burger King just launched an Impossible Whopper. Both Starbucks and Dunkin' have meatless sausage that goes on their sandwiches. And even Panera has set a goal to have 50% of their menu plant-based by 2021. And we're seeing companies like Tyson, America's largest meat producer, which is now producing meatless chicken nuggets as well as a variety of other meatless products. And what we know is the research is showing this as well. Many of you are probably familiar with the Good Food Institute. They're a US-based nonprofit that promotes plant-based alternatives to the products of conventional animal agriculture. They recently shared this public research, and after an analysis of the growth of plant-based meat, their data was taken from distributors that service 40% of the nation's food service sales volume. And what that showed was that plant-based meats are one of the fastest growing categories. And then we've had the COVID-19 outbreak and the global pandemic that came about, as we all know, earlier this year, and is still very much impacting the world to this day in a variety of different ways. I know that each and every one of you that are food service operators are thinking about how to pivot, and probably still have a lot of questions as to what's going to come about in the fall and what it means for your service. But it, in general, has brought a spotlight onto our food systems and brought up a lot of questions. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention has found that 3 out of every 4 new or emerging infectious diseases in people come from animals. We know COVID-19 is caused by a virus that is thought to have jumped from wild animals to humans through an intermediate host at a wet market in China. However, COVID-19 is not the first virus to jump from animals to people, nor will it be the last. In fact, we know the last global pandemic before COVID-19 originated in farm animals. So what is happening now? Well, research, and this is just a snapshot of what the research is showing right now, but this is taken from the Journal of Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, has identified and warned of the immediate risk of another pandemic from factory farms, also known as confined animal feeding operations. So intensive farming involving the overuse of antibiotics, which Isaac is going to touch on later as well, higher numbers of animals in smaller spaces, and low genetic diversity are hotbeds for pathogens to spread. Now, even beyond what we're talking about with COVID, we know that some 80 billion land animals are slaughtered for meat every year around the world. Most livestock is factory farmed, an estimated 99% in the United States and 74% around the world. So knowing this, the majority of the meat we purchase at the grocery store comes from these confined animal feeding operations. So less than 2 weeks ago, a study published in the same journal that has been testing pigs in China for the last 7 years actually found 179 swine influenza viruses. It's deemed likely that these viruses continue to become a larger problem on these confined animal feeding operations. It inevitably increases the risk of exposure to humans. So the researchers state that this is a wake-up call to be more responsible about farming methods so we can reduce the risk of outbreaks of problematic pathogens in the future. So another piece of the conversation is looking at the conditions of those working in these confined animal feeding operations and slaughterhouses. So you can see from headlines from the Washington Post to Fox News, what they're saying is it's very clear our food system is unstable. Over the last few months, the number of infections tied to 3 of the country's biggest meat processors has tripled, according to the Post analysis. Sick workers mean plant shutdowns, which have led to a backlog of animals. And the National Pork Producers Council estimates that over 10 million market hogs will need to be killed. So keep in mind, those 10 million hogs, these animals are not being utilized for food. So what does that mean? That means meat supplies in grocery stores will most likely shrink and prices could spike, and the impact could become even more acute later this year. So bottom line, again, the pandemic has raised many more questions about our current food system that we should no longer ignore. And what we know is that the good news is it seems like we're not ignoring these issues. We're beginning to see more and more headlines like this one from the Washington Post. In fact, I think I saw probably 4 or 5 headlines talking about this just over the weekend as well. But this particular article saying per capita consumption of meat is set to fall by almost 3% in 2020 to the lowest it has been since 2011. And this data is taken from the United Nations. And meanwhile, analysts across the globe are predicting declines, not just per capita, but for overall demand. And what this is hinting at is structural change taking place. Millions eating more plant-based proteins for a variety of different reasons, including environmental concerns, which again, Isaac will be touching on shortly. And we also know that recent data, again, from the Good Food Institute, has revealed that 24% of consumers report eating more plant-based foods due to COVID. And the largest group from that polling revealed that Gen Z and millennials are doing most of that, shifting that. So I know a lot of you that are on the webinar today, that is your customer base, that your customer focus. This is what they're shifting more to do even more. And then we're seeing articles like this, tofu goes mainstream. Who would have thought, right? But we know it's not just tofu. Sales of plant-based meat have skyrocketed during the pandemic, and all plant-based meat sales are up 148% versus just last year. And sales grew twice as fast as conventional equivalents during the 4 months that this was analyzed. So we know in the past that it has been difficult and sometimes scary, like these peppers show, to get your guests to embrace the idea of eating more plant-based foods. But we're seeing this changing now more than ever. And I think, again, what we're seeing is the pandemic accelerating a lot of these changes. The timing could not be better to begin or expand your plant-based offerings. So meeting and increasing demand will not only be good for your business, but for overall health. And again, what the analysts are showing and the predictions is that this is going to be a long-term paradigm shift. So ultimately what that means is that the future is now, and the future is in your hands. How can we change our food system for the better? And the first thing, and most importantly, is that it starts with you. You can pave a healthier, more sustainable future by guiding these impactful, delicious food choices through your menu options that you're serving. So we're going to dive a bit deeper right now and see how you can successfully integrate more plant-based meal options as you pivot your meal prep and serving techniques during this pandemic. So one of our chefs on staff always quotes the movie Field of Dreams. And instead of saying, if you build it, they will come, she says, if you make it look and taste good, they will eat it. And she's right. So another piece of driving delicious menu items is the name, correct? So taking inventory of your existing plant-based products or menu items and then jazzing them up. So the example that you're seeing on the screen is a PBJ. And if you said something like a pureed nut spread with a grape relish reduction paired with a brioche bun, Now, of course, this is a joke, but you most likely are getting the concept there, that this idea is spot on. Much of this that we're going to be talking about and that you're thinking about is not about reinventing the wheel, but thinking about the wheel in a different way per se. So let's think about some ingredients that I know you're going to be able to source during these challenging times. And thinking about this, cross-utilizing inexpensive ingredients, turning basic plant-based ingredients into a variety of different meals and recipes. So this is going to help reduce food costs, labor costs, and cut time when ordered, and even completing your inventory. So I'm going to start with my favorite ingredient, garbanzo beans or chickpeas, and we'll just highlight some of the different ideas and menu concepts that you could do with chickpeas. Now, of course, you can get them dried, frozen, canned, most likely during this time with limited labor. The easiest thing is going to be canned, and you can turn them into something as simple as a hummus. Most of you probably feature hummus of some sorts on your menus, or if you don't, definitely consider trying it again. Prior to working for the HSUS, I worked for a school district in Florida, and very much know that one thing that goes so well on a menu one year, thinking you know what your customers want, you put it on the next year and it bombs. So just if something hasn't worked out, does not mean that you shouldn't try it again. So obviously hummus is a very basic idea that can be turned into a wrap, be part of a grab and go concept. You could even purchase prepared hummus in bulk or individual packaging depending on your kitchen facilities and distributor options. You can add different flavor profiles if you want to add different colors, adding beets or roasted red peppers to add a pop of color there as well. Or roasting them. I'm sure many of you have tried roasting chickpeas, but the seasoning ingredients and different sauces or marinades that you can put on them are endless. And they can be prepared and stored in an airtight container for several days. So this is something that you can prepare ahead of time. If you're doing mobile serving, this is something that's really going to work well. And these can go on top of grab and go bowl ideas like a barbecue chopped salad bowl, buffalo chickpea bowl, or served in a snack pack or type of grab and go idea. Or doing something like a chana masala. And with this is the idea of doing like a one pot type recipe so that when it's cooking and simmering, you're able to do other tasks before meal service. And something like this, if you swapped out the seasonings for more of an Italian base, then you could do a zesty Italian marinara with chickpeas as well. So keeping the core ingredients and just switching out some of the flavor profiles. Or doing an amazing lo mein with chickpeas. And you can certainly swap out different beans. I'm just using chickpeas as the example, but certainly there's a multitude of recipes that you could do with pinto beans, black beans, any of the beans there to give you the same kind of concept. And of course, there's cost savings tied to this. So if you did something like a chickpea salad instead of a tuna salad, you have the potential of saving 42 cents per serving. And when you're serving hundreds to thousands of meals a day, we know that adds up. And then utilizing speed scratch with grab and go concepts, excuse me. So if you're working in a K-12 program featuring bowls, shaker meals, handhelds, bento boxes, snack packs, if you're in a higher education or a hospital setting where you have different stations or various serving areas, doing quick step recipes that can be implemented for multiple uses. So thinking about ingredients and meal options that can apply to all applications. So with this idea is really thinking about how can you utilize your canned, frozen, or easy to prepare products. So this is an example of a burrito bowl using black beans canned canned refried beans, canned corn, canned salsa, and the ready-to-use shredded lettuce and diced onions. And we know that the ready-to-use products, because of convenience, may be slightly more expensive than purchasing the whole ingredients, but it does save some of the labor, and if you're not operating at full capacity with your kitchen, can help with that as well. And for this, again, the rice can be cooking as you're getting other ingredients ready to go. And the nice thing about dishes like this is they can be served cold or hot, depending on your meal service capabilities. And I kind of touched on the idea of a one-pot dishes, but this is really a great way to utilize speed, scratch, and prepare other components while it's cooking. So various chilies or stews, you throw the ingredients together, let it simmer, and then it's ready for meal service. And this is an example of an enchilada chili bowl. And then thinking about fillings for tacos, burritos, enchiladas, empanadas, these fillings can be served as part of a dip, part of a bowl, served separately on a taco station, or even part of a reheat meal if you're going in that direction as well. And then thinking about preparing recipes in a larger batch and then freezing. So this is something that maybe you have labor, a larger amount of labor at one time, getting larger amounts prepared and then freezing and planning your cycle menus to allow for these ingredients. So going back to the chili concept, this is a perfect idea where this can be part of nachos. You could put it on, potentially on top of pasta. You can do the chili bowls, a variety of different options there. Same thing for a nacho cheese. This particular nacho cheese is dairy-free. It's made with potatoes and carrots, and this is something that can be prepared ahead of time and then frozen, and then again used for pasta, soups, nachos, tacos, taco pizzas, chili cheese bowls. I think I just listed like a week's worth of menus right there. So thinking about that, the options truly are endless. And again, thinking about cost savings, if you're doing the nacho cheese with the potatoes and carrots versus a traditional dairy nacho cheese base, you have the potential of saving 20 cents per serving. Or doing something like crispy garbanzo bean sliders. So going back to my favorite, the chickpeas, you can have the sliders prepared, formed, and then freeze those, and then bring them out, thaw them when they're ready to go or when they're featured on the menus. Or doing something like a lentil chorizo. So this would be a great filling for Mexican-inspired dishes like we spoke about, or used in a breakfast hash, burger patties, pizza toppings, part of that chili base. And then obviously, many of you probably have access to different plant-based products that are available through your distributor, especially those of you that might not be going back to full cook kitchens or have never had that, really looking at what is available from different companies. And if you're looking for a robust list of these kind of products, we do have it on our website at forwardfood.org that you can use as a reference. But just to give you a couple examples here, thinking about if you have the option for doing like a lentil crumble or a beefless crumble that can easily be swapped into existing recipes, just removing the animal product from that. So this is a super sloppy joe. This is so quick, ready to prepare in less than 20 minutes. You're mixing barbecue sauce with whether it's the lentil crumble or beefless crumble, letting it heat to the necessary temperature. And then this is something that could be served on a sandwich, but knowing if you're serving mobily or might not be able to hold that, you could also do serve it with chips for like a dip, or doing nachos, doing a twist to do a barbecue nacho bowl, which would feature something like this. And then again, just switching up the flavor profile using those same products, maybe mixing it with salsa, a little taco seasoning, and you have your tacos. You could do a tasty taco sandwich. You have nachos. Truly, the options are endless. Or many of you probably have access to a frozen veggie burger. So think about different toppings you have available that could be made very quickly, like a sriracha ketchup, onion rings, pineapple rings, barbecue sauce. You could call it a beach burger or something a little bit different that's going to spark the interest of your guests and customers. And then of course, doing more grab and go type things, using products that come in individually packaged, can be shelf stable. I know if you are in the K-12 world, probably the majority of your summer feeding is looking similar to something like this, but carrying it on into the fall. Or if you work in higher education or healthcare, looking at other options that can easily be incorporated so people have a little bit of this and a little bit of that in there. And then along these same lines is thinking about offering deconstructed meal options for mobile feeding sites. We know not everything is going to hold well that you would traditionally be serving to your guests, especially thinking about sandwich options. So giving the idea of a banana crunch wrap, you can easily package the items in a bag and allow the customers to prepare their own wraps, which might be a fun take on doing something like this. And then what we're seeing is also modifying your best-selling dishes. So this is an example from a hospital system. One of their best-selling menu items is cauliflower and lentil curry. So what they want to do is move this into more of a grab and go type dish. So using a 2-compartment bowl, they separate the rice and the curry, and then this would allow them to eat separately or in transfer or even heat together in the container. And then the toppings can be portioned separately if desired. And then there's a university where their top selling sandwich is the tofu banh mi sandwich. And that's, again, something that doesn't necessarily hold well or can't be transported well. So a couple different options would be taking the recipes and then switching them to be more grab and go. So thinking about doing a banh mi bowl, or if you have access to the clear 12-ounce, traditionally like parfait cups, they can be layered, the different ingredients. And again, this is something that could either be a hot or a cold dish, depending on what your meal service looks like. And then if you do have plans of actually serving on your lines and having stations, thinking about your station setup, making customizable concepts, highlighting the plants and their benefits. So what do I mean by that? So if you are having customers go through the serving lines, be thoughtful in your line setup, highlighting the plant-based foods first, then at the end, offering the animal meat. So the thought behind it is to allow your customers to fill their plates with the colorful, beautiful produce and grains before getting to the protein, and then highlighting the plant protein. And this is also a really great option for you to be able to educate your staff as well, so that they're familiar with the different plant proteins as well as the produce and whole grain options. And then highlighting your station with plants. So when thinking about this, if you do have stations, think about making the plant-based option the only option for your station that day. So for example, one of the images you see is of shepherd's pie. So instead of serving a traditional shepherd's pie as well as a lentil shepherd's pie at your comfort station, save the ingredients and labor and prepare the less expensive yet equally delicious lentil shepherd's pie that day. So it's loaded with protein-packed lentils, eye-catching colors from those veggies that are in there. And of course, who can resist the crispy potatoes on top? Or if you have a pizza station, that obviously can have endless options, but consider flipping the scales on the amount of meat-based pizza offerings, loading up your offerings with veggie-heavy pizzas. And then finally, planning cycle menus to use plant-based ingredients multiple times without seeming repetitive. So we touched on this earlier, but just to show you visually what this looks like. I had mentioned a lentil chorizo, but I switched it up to be my favorite, chickpea chorizo. So you could certainly do it with any kind of variety of different beans as well. So this gives you a 5-day, 1-week cycle menu here, Monday through Friday, thinking about meal service if you do breakfast, lunch, or dinner, just giving different ideas that's using the same basic ingredient that looks very different. So you have waffles with chickpea chorizo patties to a spicy sweet potato hash, and then in the evening, you have your chorizo avocado rice bowls or smoky chorizo pizza. So just thinking about how to really limit the amount of total labor and ingredients and really amp up your menus. But most importantly, it's important for you to have fun during these challenging times. Thinking about unique ways to market to your guests and celebrate plant-forward options is critical. And you're going to be hearing from Ron from the Monday campaigns, so he's going to be able to show you and share how programs are successfully marketing the meatless options. But now I am going to be passing it on to Isaac Emery to discuss how increasing plant-based meals is not only better for us, but for the environment as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Karla. So much information there. That's wonderful. Great. So my name is Isaac Emery. I'm a sustainability scientist and consultant based here in Seattle. I'm glad it's a little bit early in Seattle. If it was closer to lunch, I think I'd be getting pretty hungry from all those pictures, Karla. So thanks for highlighting how delicious this can look. I am also the carbon accountant for the Humane Society's Forward Food Program. So I may have the opportunity to work with some of you on the call here in the future. I'd be happy to talk to you about that and how that can work. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the environmental importance of going plant-based and how these changes to your menus that are good for your customers' health, that are good for your bottom line, can also be good for the planet. So we're going to talk a little bit about the environmental issues, why these are so important. We're going to talk a little bit about land, water, our own human health, and the climate, of course, can't avoid climate change. And then specifically about what foods we can use to solve this problem and how institutions have done that successfully. So fundamentally, the whole problem with environmental science and environmentalism today is that the Earth is a physical space that has limits. The Earth is only so big, and there's a whole lot of people on it. So when scientists have looked at what parts of the Earth, what the things you've heard of, like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, all these things that the Earth provides for us that we need to stay alive and to have our society run the way that we like it to run, we need to keep the Earth within its happy limits. So here we can see what scientists have called our planetary boundaries. And those are essentially 9 systems, like the water, 9 cycles, like the water cycle, the carbon cycle. The ozone layer is a great important boundary that we all have heard about. So here we have these 9: climate change, pollutants, the ozone layer, ocean acidification, nutrients. All of these we need to keep in within a certain zone so that the planet functions the way we want it to function. We want the Earth to be healthy so we can be healthy. In this chart shows how well we're doing with that. So you can see kind of in this dashed line, there's the green in the very middle of this chart. And so the little pie segments that are inside the dashed line that are all green, that's where we're doing all right. So for example, you can see there in the middle, the ozone layer. We used to have some pretty big problems with the ozone layer, but we actually managed to fix that. We switched up our technology, and now we aren't causing damage to the ozone layer. It heals over time, and now we're in the safe zone there. But you can see some of these other areas, we aren't really in the safe zone anymore. Of course, climate change right there kind of in the middle on the top. Whoops. Oh, shucks. That was, so you can see climate change there. We're in the kind of a danger zone. With biodiversity and forest health, we're in a bit of a danger zone. And with nutrient cycles, which I can talk about a little bit later, we're in the danger zone. So unfortunately, the slide already flipped forward. I accidentally hit my mouse there. So you can see, I was gonna ask, think to yourself, or type in the chat, think about this. Without food and agriculture, where do you think we might be? So this is where we are now. Some of these systems like biodiversity and climate change are in trouble. What if we didn't have food and agriculture? How much do those cause? Damage do those cause for planetary boundaries? And the answer that you saw real quickly when I flip forward is it makes a huge difference. Without food and agriculture, our biggest environmental problems are essentially solved. And of course, that doesn't really help us because we need food, right? Obviously we'd have much different problems if we didn't have food and agriculture. So we can't pretend that we can just get rid of our farms and get rid of food. But it does tell us that paying attention to where our food comes from and the kinds of food that we eat is really critical for solving our biggest environmental problems. So that's what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes here. And I'm going to look at the role that food and agriculture play in some of these really big environmental issues. I'll save climate, sort of the one that we're all familiar with, for last. So let's start off by talking about land use. So the way that we use land in the world really is the driving factor that affects 2 of the 9 planetary boundaries: forest health and biodiversity. So you can see on this chart from Our World in Data, one of my very favorite websites, lots of publicly available charts and data and explanations of all things science, freely available. You can see we use a lot of land in the world, 4 billion hectares. That's about 8 or 9 billion acres. It's a lot, it's a big number. And most of that we've just started using in the last couple hundred years, and we use almost all of it for our food. So you can see in the red there, we've got all of the land around the world that we use to grow crops. And in the green, that huge spike that we use for grazing animals. So this is kind of, you've heard of the hockey stick chart for climate. This is essentially the hockey stick chart for biodiversity and for forests. And how much is that? Well, it's a lot. We know it's a lot. It's half of all of the useful land on planet Earth that we use to grow our food. So a lot, it's really a lot. There's most of the land on Earth is what we call habitable. I mean, it's good for forests, and we have forests and grassland and wetlands and shrubland and all the kind of ecosystems that we know and love and are familiar with, where lots of plants and animals live. And of all that land, we now use half of it to supply our food. But we don't use all foods aren't quite created equal. So only less than a quarter of that land around the world do we actually use for crops that feed people. Our chickpeas, our lentils, our wheat, our corn, our sweet corn, vegetables, fruits, nut orchards, coffee, chocolate, all those things to feed people are on less than a quarter of the land that we use for agriculture. And the rest of it is pasture, is rangeland, or is cropland that we use to feed cows, pigs, and chickens. And you can see on this chart, again from Our World in Data here, that in terms of global calories, that's a really small amount of the actual food that we need. So we use almost all of that land to produce a really small amount of our actual food. And even just looking at protein there on the bottom of this chart, it's even a small amount of our protein. So we think about meat as this really key, important protein source, and it is for some people in some places, but overall, we still get, around the world, we still get most of our protein from plants, and that's all on that little sliver of cropland from in this chart here. So there's going to be a lot of pictures in this presentation. I'm a scientist, I love graphs, and hopefully I think we'll be able to continue. These will be pretty clear. So that previous chart was for the whole world. The story is very similar here in the United States. We use almost half of all of the land in the United States to feed cows, pigs, and chickens. And a lot of that, of course, is pasture and rangeland, but a huge amount of it it's a smaller box on that chart, but it's still, you can see that box compared to the livestock feed crops box on this chart. Compared to the states that we see, it's bigger than Ohio and Indiana combined. It's bigger than a lot bigger than Pennsylvania. All of that land, basically the size of, you know, Wyoming, is good cropland that we could be using for people that we instead use to grow corn and soybeans to feed to animals. So it's just an issue of what kinds of food we're choosing to grow and how we're going about feeding ourselves. And of course, I told you before, the reason this is so important is that all of this land used to be forests and pastures and grassland and wetlands. And we're entering the sort of this big biodiversity crisis where, because we've taken half of all of the good land on the planet and used it to feed ourselves, we're creating one of the largest extinction events in the Earth's history. So yeah, it's really sad. Of the 28,000 species around the world that are threatened with extinction are on the IUCN Red List, which tracks animals and plants around the world. Agriculture and aquaculture, so growing our food, our fish, is a threat for 24,000 of the 28,000 species at risk of extinction. So that's a lot. It's a big part of the problem, like you see on the planetary boundaries chart. Water is also an important source of habitat for many, many animals and plants, and we're also damaging the water-based ecosystems around the world. So you can see again on the planetary boundaries chart, we're way out of the green on this area called nutrient cycles. And in the photo here, you can see it's divided in half. On the top half of the picture, we've got a beautiful blue, clear, healthy lake. And on the bottom, we basically just have an algae pond. And this is what happens when fertilizers and manure run off of farmland and rangeland into streams, rivers, and oceans. Is it basically causes we get these big algae outbreaks, and it disturbs the species that live there naturally. And it's a really big problem. In fact, scientists have identified about 90% of all US rivers have been altered by these nutrient pollutions, by fertilizer and manure that runs off. And just thinking about property values and recreational value of our rivers, just looking at that by itself causes us about $2 to $4 billion in damage in the United States every year. So this is big scale. If we look around the world, you can see this map of the world here. We don't see the countries, but we see all the different rivers and watersheds around the world. All the colors in orange and red are where we have overwhelmed sort of the Earth's natural ability to absorb all of these nutrients, our fertilizers and the manure that runs off of our cropland. So that's most of the planet, and that's why we're seeing this nutrient cycles bit way outside of the green. We're in trouble around the world. And just this month, I think, some scientists with the United Nations published a paper showing that even if we just look at cows, pigs, and chickens, the livestock sector around the world, that by itself would be enough to kick us out of the little green pie chart on our planetary boundaries chart on our nutrient cycles. So we really need to rethink how we're feeding ourselves to keep the planet within these boundaries that we need to keep ourselves healthy. So there's also, in the planetary boundaries chart, there's a section for other pollutants, things that we don't really know how to add up in a way with numbers that make sense, but that we already know are really important for human health. So these are things like diseases from animals, zoonotic diseases. So just like Karla was saying earlier, and this is from another, we know that we're getting a lot of diseases in people from animals. If you look at sort of the last 5 diseases around the world that have come up in the media and been really scary, almost all of them we got from animals. And just last week, a different set of UN scientists came out with a report saying, here are the 7 ways that we catch those diseases. And the top 2 of the 7 reasons we're getting these new diseases are because of meat. So the first one is how much meat that we eat around the world. People want more animal protein, which means more animals. And the second is that we aren't getting that meat in a very sustainable way. And so those are the two things, how much meat and how we're getting it are what's driving our risks from diseases from animals right now. So that's a really big part of this problem. And this another part, which Karla also mentioned, is antibiotic resistant diseases. So we're just for the last 100 years, we've had antibiotics that let us do all kinds of really amazing medicine. They treat infections, they let us do surgery. We can do all kinds of things in a hospital because we know that we can treat bacteria if things get infected. And without antibiotics, anytime you get a cut or an injection at the doctor's office, all of a sudden you're at higher risk if we know we can't treat these diseases. And the main source of antibiotic resistant bugs, bacteria, is farm animals, unfortunately. So of all the, we've looked at how we use antibiotics in the United States. Of all the antibiotics that are important for people, more than half of them we use in animal feed to get them to grow faster. So this goes right back to that UN report at the top of the screen, this danger from the way that we get our, way that we do our farming, the way that we get our food, that is damaging to our health, not just the planet's health, but to us. And of course, there's climate change. So don't worry. I know this sounds like a lot of doom and gloom. It's true, we're in trouble, but we're going to get to the solution in just a moment. The last big environmental problem that I'll mention, which we all know about, is climate change. The IPCC, which is the International Panel of Scientists that study climate change, that look at all of the information from scientists all around the world, have looked at this and said, okay, we know that it's hard to add up all these different things around the world, but we can do it. And 21 to 37%, about a third of all of our greenhouse gas emissions around the world come from the food system. And the food system, of course, is larger than just farms. It includes farms and ranches. It also includes trucks that move food and animals from place to place, storing food, refrigerators, packaging, processing, retail, all of these different parts. And we'll look at which parts of those are the most important. So here we can see where those climate emissions, those greenhouse gases, come from. If we start sort of at the bottom of this chart, we can see that the little blue bars at the bottom here are fertilizers. So quite a bit of the greenhouse gas emissions, a lot of the climate impact from food is coming from the same fertilizers that are causing our water pollution problems. So that's a connection here. All these problems tend to be interconnected because the world is interconnected, right? The next big piece coming up is manure. So manure from pastures and the way that we have to manage it at confined animal feeding operations is almost a quarter of all of the climate emissions around the world from our food system. Cattle and sheep and goats and other animals that we don't eat too much of here in the United States. But all of those animals have, well, a gas problem, you might have heard. So cows burp, sheep and goats burp, and that adds up actually to a huge amount of climate change. Again, almost a quarter of our emissions. Transportation is important. You've probably heard about food miles and the importance of getting food locally. There are a lot of benefits to getting locally sourced food, but climate change isn't the big one. So the transportation part of food is relatively small. And then at the top in green, we have land use change, and that's the deforestation and cutting down forests in the Amazon to graze cattle. It's plowing up grasslands to plant corn for animal feed, for chickens. And that's another really big source of our food's greenhouse gas emissions. So those were a lot of problems. I don't want to depress you. We have a solution and we have ways of solving all of these different environmental problems. And the good news is that because food is such an important part of all of these problems, food is also an important solution to so many of these problems. So the solution essentially here is eat plants. If we look back at that exact same chart on climate change, if we look at what foods those emissions belong to, we see that meat, dairy, and eggs, and this chart is for an average diet in Europe. We eat pretty similar foods in the United States. I've looked at the data and it's pretty similar. I just don't have a pretty chart. And we see that almost all of the greenhouse gas emissions are from animal-based foods. So when we look at the food type up at the top, all of our vegetables, our oils and sugars, our cereals, our bread, our nuts, root vegetables, all of that is just in that little top sliver, those different colors at the top of the foods that we eat. So by cutting out meat, dairy, and eggs, replacing that with plants will have a huge difference on the carbon footprint of what we eat and the carbon footprint of our entire civilization. So a similar chart showing where things come from. If we, again, just look at protein, people often think of meat as this really important protein source. If we're looking just at the greenhouse gas emissions, the climate change impacts of different protein sources, we see that we can get the same amount of protein with much, much smaller emissions, those little light-colored little bars at the bottom of this chart, from our plant sources. So nuts, peas, pulses, tofu, grains, these are all the lowest carbon sources of protein if we're just trying to get protein. So there is going to be several charts just like this one with it, but the big bars at the top will have our largest environmental impacts, and the foods at the bottom have the smallest environmental impacts. And we'll see a bit of a pattern here. So again, now we're looking at what we scientists call eutrophying emissions. These are those water pollution. This is all that water pollution from fertilizer and manure runoff. And again, not too surprising, we see again the highest environmental impact. All these foods at the top are these animal products. And for this includes farmed fish, it includes cheese and dairy products, beef, of course, poultry and pork, and all of the foods at the bottom, apples, fruits, bananas, corn, tomatoes, bread, nuts, all of those are much less environmentally damaging. And we see again, so scientists have looked at what if we ate more plants and less meat. If we ate a healthy diet, but with more plants and less meat, we could cut the environmental damage of this nutrient pollution by half, which is really huge. If we look at the same kind of chart, but for how much land it takes, how much habitat do we need to use? Again, we see animal products at the top, plant foods at the bottom. Plant foods, we can get a lot more food and much healthier food on the same amount of land. Studies have looked just at the United States and found that we could feed twice as many people here in the United States using a quarter of the land that we use for farming now, just by growing grains, veggies, and nuts for people instead of all of this land for livestock. I know I'm running a little bit on time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. We've looked at what does this mean for you, right? What can you put on your menus that will solve this problem? We've looked at a couple of options. I worked with the Center for Biological Diversity to compare the environmental impacts of 2 catering menus for a multi-day event. We have an example of some of those foods here. So we see the breakfasts, the lunches, and the dinners are sort of parallel to each other. We've got similar kinds of foods on the menus. And we found again that the veggie menu, which the charts here show in light green, have smaller environmental impacts, smaller damage to climate change, smaller damage to habitat than the animal-based menu in dark green. So that's true for all 3 of the breakfast, lunch, and dinner menus. We get the same results when we look at water use and water pollution from manure. The animal-based foods in dark green require more water and pollute more water than the veggie menus in light green. We've also looked, Karla talked a lot about how you can use individual menu substitutions. You can switch out one ingredient for another. And that we see also, you don't have to change your entire menu. If you make individual ingredient substitutions, that also makes a really big difference in the climate impact and the other environmental impacts of your food. So here we see if you replace in a chicken curry, if you use tempeh instead of chicken, you cut out more than half of the climate impact of that entire dish, not just that one ingredient, right? In a hamburger, if you use like a Beyond Burger or an Impossible Burger, that cuts around about 90% of the climate change impact of the whole burger. Same with using a chickpeas in a salad instead of tuna, you're cutting out about a third of the climate impact of the entire dish. So these little ingredient substitutions have a really big impact too. So even if you're not able to switch up your whole menu, you can still have a big impact. We have some success stories to share. Again, I talked about the work that I'm able to do with Forward Food and the Humane Society. One of the school districts that we worked with implemented Lean and Green, basically Meatless Monday, except it just wasn't Monday, so they called it Lean and Green Day, vegetarian entrees 1 day each week. They cut out their meat purchases by almost 500,000 pounds a year, and that cut down their climate impact by 20,000 pounds of CO2 every day that they use the Lean and Green menu. Huge, huge impact. 3,300 to 3,700 tons of climate emissions per year. And we were also able to come up with some educational materials to the students to show the kids what a difference they were making with their menu choices. Really big numbers. We worked with a private college, fairly small school, but still able to have a big impact. They reduced their meat purchases over a 1-year period, and were able to cut their emissions from meat by about 8%. That was 10 tons of climate emissions every month. They made these changes. They cut out pork, beef, lamb, and shrimp, reduced all those purchases. You can tell, they only reduced pork and beef purchases by about 10-15%, but it still had a big impact. And we're also able to show they could, again, making those one ingredient substitutions. We had 16 additional items that we could just swap out for existing plant-based foods. And we were able to say just those 16 items, if they made that switch, could reduce their emissions by another 20%. So really big impact with really simple changes. Hopefully this inspires you to sort of share with your dining services, share with your sustainability folks, share with your colleagues, and show how much of a difference you can make for your community and for the whole planet with really simple changes that save you money.
Great. So thank you, Isaac. That was really informative. And we actually take advantage of a lot of the similar types of research that Isaac does in what I will be talking about in regard to marketing your meatless menus to all these different audiences that you work with. So I'm Ron Hernandez with the Monday campaigns. Just quick introductions of what the Monday campaigns is about. We actually are a health initiative that uses Monday as the foundation for a lot of our concepts for changing health behavior. And what we found in our research studies that we do in collaboration with a lot of our institutional partners, Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future, Columbia University, Syracuse University, and a couple of hospital partners, is that people are engaged on Mondays, where they're seeking out health information on Monday versus other days of the week. People who describe starting a healthy behavior on Monday also describe being more consistent with that behavior throughout the rest of the week. So we're really finding that Monday can function as a behavioral cue to get people engaged with new behavior or staying consistent with that healthy behavior once they've made the commitment. And so that really functions as the foundation for our entire portfolio. The Monday Campaigns initiative consists of several concepts. Obviously, we'll be talking about Meatless Monday today, but we also do offer other concepts around a healthy Monday, overall health and wellness package that incorporates several different health behaviors, including diet and nutrition, but also physical activity, stress management, quitting tobacco use, and self-care for people who function as caregivers. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Meatless Monday, since that's the subject of today. Meatless Monday is a global movement, and more than 40 countries have actually adopted this concept and integrated it into practices within those countries. It's been translated to more than 22 languages around the world. And what we're finding is that people really feel engaged by this as a movement. Beyond just being a practice, Meatless Monday is also a community of people who are making this change, who've made these commitments toward better health, more sustainable food choices, animal welfare, etc. So the Meatless Monday movement really is something beyond just a simple practice. It's really about being involved in an overall community of people who've made this commitment to change. We run a consumer survey of it every other year, and what we found is that the majority of people who are making a commitment to making these diet changes is because of health reasons. Environmental impact and sustainability actually are also important factors. What we find is that people who are in the younger demographics, as Karla described earlier, that sort of 18 to 34 sort of Gen Z millennial group, are the people who are more receptive to that type of messaging. We are finding that the majority of people are saying that they're making this change for health reasons. The one great thing about Meatless Monday is that there is a high level of awareness within the community. This is based on a US survey, but because of that high level of awareness, there's an opportunity to really use the Meatless Monday concept to get people engaged and then hopefully help them sustain that commitment to this behavioral change over time. What we've also seen is that of the people who were aware of the movement, they describe Meatless Monday as being a factor in cutting back on meat, and also eating more fruits and vegetables, trying meatless meals on other days of the week. This is the type of trend that we want to see, is once you start on that Monday, that you're making that commitment on other days of the week. And then the other consideration is settings. Many people are eating meatless meals outside of the home, but many people also have requested information about doing more meatless cooking at home. So our concept really offers a number of recipes to people who want to continue that even outside of a dining service operation. So this is kind of a similar chart to what Karla was showing earlier, but what we know is that when people are making this change, they're doing it incrementally. They're not just going from carnivores to vegan. They're making these small steps toward that long-term change. And so, as you see in the bottom portion of this pyramid, which the Center for a Livable Future developed for us, it's the majority of the people here in this section that we're trying to persuade. So we want to move them up that continuum and maybe make this portion of the pyramid at the top much larger, of people who are moving towards cutting out meat entirely. And so when we think about consumer trends, we know that plant-based food demand is going up. Just even before COVID hit, as Karla described, there has been this trend and more interest in plant-based foods. Those plant-based meats, that GFI data, where 37% of the sales have increased over time. We also know that most of the plant-based customers who are new are also still eating meat, but they're converting more to these plant-based options. And we're looking at not just plant-based substitutes, but we're also looking at whole foods as well. The other consideration is, during this pandemic, people have started to see, okay, there's scarcity and I have to make some other food choices. I have to look at being more creative in terms of what I have. So plant-based foods sales were increasing, but even after that initial spike, there has been a maintenance of more than 27% of people who are continuing to buy plant-based foods. We work with a lot of different types of institutional partners to actually implement Meatless Monday, and all the materials that you see here, the research that we do in collaboration with our partners, is available for free. So we're working with these institutions to integrate the Meatless Monday concept to get people at those sites started. We work with hospitals, we work with schools, universities, we've worked with communities to do full community-wide implementations of Meatless Monday as well. And so I just wanted to share a couple of examples of where awareness of Meatless Monday has gone up by working with these different institutions, where the baseline was down here, where you see the dark green at 33%. At 2 incremental periods throughout the pilot program implementation, the awareness of Meatless Monday went up to 53% and then ultimately 60% after the second survey that we conducted at this site. So what does that mean? How is that significant in terms of getting people engaged? Well, people who were exposed to the Meatless Monday messaging described an influence on some of their food choices. So they described eating more fruits and vegetables, eating less meat, trying more meatless recipes at home, and trying to incorporate more meatless meals throughout the week. So we are seeing a level of engagement by starting with that Meatless Monday. Similarly, when we did the implementation in the community, we found that people were more committed to doing Meatless Monday at 3 and 6 month intervals. So, you know, initially where they maybe weren't engaged at all, they really started to make a higher level of commitment towards their more plant-based meatless diet. So how did we make all that happen? Meatless Monday, we really function as a free resource for all types of organizations to use our concept and our creative materials in the way that feels most appropriate for them. So we do everything across all different channels and media for people to use and integrate. So we offer fact sheets, we have different graphics, we have different creative materials. We encourage people to do tastings and have signings posted at their different institutions. Menu ID cards, service line signage, point of sale, all types of different messaging that are easily integrated. Now, with the pandemic in place, we know that several different promotional channels aren't going to be available over time in the same aggressive way that they had been in the past. And Karla referred to this earlier in terms of this grab and go approach, where people are not spending time sitting down, dining in at the different locations. So many of the promotional opportunities are fading away a little bit. Some places will still have the opportunity to continue to market using those channels, but we know that we have to make more of a digital focused effort. So some of the things are going to still be viable. You can still promote Meatless Monday saying that plant-based foods are served at your institution. You can offer the fact sheets and information that speak to the health messaging and the sustainability messaging. One thing that we encourage people to do is something that HSUS already encourages people to do, which is take a pledge and have your institution make the pledge at the leadership level, but then also request that of the employees and the other consumer groups that you're addressing. Making a pledge is sort of the start of that psychological change. The other thing that's happening is people are using apps more. For those organizations that offer pickup service, the apps are a great way to continue promoting those plant-based options. So making those more prominent on the front page, perhaps on a Monday, also on other days of the week though, as it feels appropriate, but really promoting the fact that the plant-based options are available for delivery and pickup. Keeping staff engaged continues to be important, where maybe you won't have the full service staff online all the time because people do have to pay attention to distancing and different schedules that have changed because of COVID. It is still important to make sure that your staff's aware of why the plant-based options might be better for your consumer base, and also to push those and make them aware of the messaging associated with choosing the more meatless plant-based meals. We've also done a lot of publicity around this. One thing that has been particularly motivating for people is the fact that by promoting the fact that you are making a commitment to plant-based foods and meatless meals, you can actually generate more publicity for your institution and talk more about the fact that plant-based meals are more viable, they are more sustainable, and in many cases can support your health better. In addition to that, we're doing more interactive marketing materials so that people can use these to engage their consumer audiences, depending on whether you run your own social media channels, whether you have a website and an email database that you're promoting to. We're really encouraging people to try to have more fun with it, make it a game. This idea of pantry staples has been more prominent where people have things in the back of their cupboard that they never thought of using, and you're trying to get them to come up with more creative ways to use them. Also, a lot of the ingredients that we're talking about store better, so you have more options available to you over time. So the Meatless Monday campaign has developed a number of different materials that speak to each of the persuasive messaging components. So this idea of focusing on the environment, we've actually developed a whole series of materials just around that messaging. So in many cases, organizations can use these as sort of a quiz and did you know kind of effort to teach people about why the plant-based options are better in regards to reduced environmental impact, reduced use of resources. In many cases, you can also customize, similar to what Isaac was showing in some of his case study examples. We've actually designed specific calculations for our institutional partners who are doing Meatless Monday to describe what it would be if just one day everybody decided not to eat that burger and had a meatless day instead. What kinds of savings would you be realizing? And this can be done for pretty much any institution because it can be done on a per serving basis. Similarly, the health focus is a huge one for us. So we really speak to all the benefits of choosing the meatless plant-based meals to increasing the proportion of plant-based foods in the diet. So we have messaging that's built around curbing obesity, helping prevent diabetes, heart disease, limiting the risks of some cancers, improving performance, and also a new series, which I'll point to later, is focused on talking about the supporting your immune function as a result of eating more plant-based foods. This is the pantry challenge I mentioned earlier, and these types of materials are available through our website for free and our social media channels for free, where we actually encouraged people to suggest different types of recipes that you could use different types of ingredients for. So people were offering up all sorts of different things. We got great engagement from social media influencers who have upwards of 100,000 followers, in some cases over 1 million. So it was a great way to really spread the word about getting people to offer up different ideas for cooking plant-based meals. We're also doing a series of materials, not just within Meatless Monday, but our other campaign concepts as well, around this idea of self-care. People who are at home more, you have to sort of maintain your own self-care. So what are some of the things you can do eating plant-based foods? You can help improve your sleep. You can swap out different options, looking at these different types of recipes that are available. Similar to the HSUS database, the Meatless Monday campaign also offers recipes that people can integrate into their lunches and dinners and weekly menus. So those are all available as well. This new series, and again, these are sort of a work in progress, but I thought it would be helpful to at least point to the fact that they'll be available for use very soon, is the series that we're developing around the immune function support benefits of more plant-based foods. So these are a work in progress that we'll be releasing within the next 4 to 6 weeks and making available to everybody who is marketing different plant-based foods at your institutions. And then finally, we're really looking at developing a series that focuses primarily on the featured meals that are delicious in and of themselves. You don't necessarily even have to make the comparison to whether it would normally have meat or animal product in it. Just focus on the food. The food's good on its own, it's delicious, and people really are appreciating the fact that visually it's arresting and it gets people more engaged, thinking, oh, okay, that's an option that I can easily integrate into my diet and start practicing at home even in some cases. So I've gone through that rather quickly, but all of the material that I've shared today is available through our new beautiful website, which we launched last month. we're very proud of it. And all of the resources that you see here today can be accessed through our new website at meatlessmonday.org or themondaycampaigns.org, and also through our social media channels, because we do keep those very highly populated with the different graphics that you see, different messaging that you can use. So definitely follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and all of that will be fed to you automatically. But also sign up for the Meatless Monday newsletter, because all of this material is shared through those channels as well. The last thing I'm going to share is that Meatless Monday and the Monday Campaigns team has teamed up with the Center for a Livable Future and the Center for Communication Programs at Johns Hopkins to develop this global community platform for all organizations who are committed to meat reduction. So beyond just the Meatless Monday concept, which many of the members use, we're also looking to get more people around the world involved in meat reduction strategies. So this platform has developed a big following with about 200 members right now from all over the world. And it's really a great forum for sharing best practices, different research resources, conducting forums to ask questions about who's doing what, and also finding opportunities for collaboration among all the different members. You know, if we're in the US and we're trying to work with somebody in China or Spain, there are members from all over the world that people can connect with and get a sense of what's happening in that country, and potentially even develop collaborative projects. One of the things that we do regularly through this platform is also share events like this one, which we did promote there. And we do have a monthly series that's developed for the community on this platform. So we hope that people will join and attend the next webinar that we have, which will be in August. And so with that, I want to leave a little time for Q&A. I'm going to close up.
Great. Thank you so much, Karla, Isaac, Ron. You all offered up so much informative content, and we have some terrific questions that have already come in. So before I start running through all these questions, I'd just like to remind everyone in our audience that if you do still have questions, there's a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen, and you can keep submitting questions as we run through all of the questions that have already been submitted. So the first question, Karla, I believe this is directed towards you. Aren't these new plant-based foods that mimic animal protein highly processed? These foods can't be healthy for us. Do you have a response to that, Karla?
Well, thank you, Amanda, and thank you to whoever did submit the question. This is certainly one that has definitely sparked a lot of conversation as we're seeing more of these products as well. And certainly, like any kind of product, the more that it is processed, certainly you want to consume those in moderation. You know, some of the processed plant-based meats, like some of the burgers that resemble beef burgers, are going to be higher in saturated fat and sodium, depending on which products you're getting. There are some that are more processed than others. So in general, what I would say is very much enjoy those items, but do so in moderation. And I think also having these kind of items available for people that are making this choice for ethical or environmental reasons versus health, that they still want to enjoy some of the flavor profiles and mouthfeel that they get from animal products. So these are a great alternative. So I think that it certainly is important to have these products on the market, but especially if health is a driving factor for you, you want to consume them in moderation.
Great, thank you, Karla. The next question is for Isaac, I believe. Does the data that you showed account for the amount of carbon sequestered by the animals while grazing?
That's a great question. I know that there are a lot of conversations online and in between scientists and the public in different reports about the benefits of carbon sequestration. Carbon is being stored by the roots of plants and in the soil when we do grazing. Yes, The short answer is yes, the numbers that I presented do include soil carbon and plant carbon from on land where animals are grazed. And the reason that a lot of the numbers for especially cows are so high, the emissions from cows, is that there are a very small number of farms and a very small number of places on the planet where the land is just right for the sort of regenerative agriculture and grazing sustainably that we see in some of the studies that show carbon neutral grazing. So it's only a very small number of farms that are able to do that in a way that's good for climate. And most of the places where we grow crops for animals and graze cows simply don't meet those criteria.
Great, thank you, Isaac. The next question we have is for Ron. So our food service operation has always offered many plant-based options every day, and I don't see any added value of taking the extra time and effort to promote Meatless Monday. Do you have any dollar figures that show profits gained by promoting Meatless Monday? And Ron, I think you are still muted, so you want to unmute yourself too.
Sorry, forgot about that. In terms of data, we have some information specific to different studies that we've done, which we can make available to the questioner. I think it would just depend on which site that we're talking about. Is it specific to a type of site that the person is asking, Amanda?
No specifics in the question, no.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, we can dig in a little bit deeper to get a better understanding based on purchasing decisions and sort of consumer uptake, because we are seeing an improvement in the proportion of people making those choices. We just have to extrapolate that to a particular setting. But nothing specifically that we've released around like a full scale analysis yet.
Great, thanks, Ron. So the next one, I believe, is for Karla. This attendee asks, I see the cost savings per serving, which are impressive, but what about cost comparison per gram of protein? I'm guessing carrots and potatoes have less protein per serving compared to cheese, or chickpeas have different protein content per serving compared to tuna.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. So sorry about that. Accidentally muted myself. Yeah, so I do not have the actual figures regarding the cost per protein, per gram of protein per serving there. I mean, obviously, you know, according to the dietary reference intake, we need about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram. So when talking about the average adult, you're looking at a total of 45 to 55 grams of protein needed per day. And this is certainly a question that comes up a lot with meatless options, in making sure that we are getting enough protein and educating our guests on that as well. And there has been a lot of research done at this end as well, and a great position paper by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics goes into a lot of that research, and the references can be there. But the really great thing is that as long as we are eating a variety of foods, whether we're following an entirely plant-based diet or an omnivorous diet, we are getting enough and most likely exceeding the amount of protein that we actually need in one day. So certainly, chickpeas, estimated per serving, have about half of the amount of protein that a serving of the canned tuna would. So if you're looking at the cost per serving related to protein versus just overall cost, that will need to be adjusted a bit.
Great, thank you, Karla. So the next question, I believe, is for Isaac. Do you have any idea why prawns use so much energy? Great
question. Yeah, so on some of those charts that I showed, there were there was a solid trend of having all the animal products at the top being high impact and the plant foods at the bottom having low impact. That's definitely true. But sometimes the animal foods switched around a little bit as to which ones were worse and which ones were better. There are some ways where farming seafood, including fish and shrimp and prawns, are worse than farming some other plant foods on land. And usually that has to do with the amount of that nutrient pollution, the fertilizer that goes in the water, because so many of these fish farms and prawn farms and shrimp farms are, out there in a river or in a lake or in the ocean. All of the food that is, of course, highly nutritious that we're feeding those animals, and those animals' waste products, which all have these chemical nutrients that are these pollutants, all stay in that small area where we have those animals penned up and either float to the bottom of the lake or ocean or are swept along by the river that they're in. And so that ends up turning that fish farm or that shrimp farm or that prawn farm into a pollution source. So usually it's that nutrient pollution that's bad for farmed fish and prawns. And in terms of climate impact, we actually, for most fish and shrimp, we actually grow plants on cropland that we could be feeding ourselves, and then use that wheat and corn and soy to feed fish and shrimp. So not a very efficient use of land if we're trying to get seafood. So those are the two main reasons.
Thanks, Isaac. So this next question, I believe, would be a good one for Karla. What is the recommended amount of protein per day?
So I think it relates back to the other question that I was just speaking about. That's certainly going to depend on the individual, the life stage that you're in, and then based on that, but typically the recommendations from the dietary reference intake is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So when looking at the amount of pounds you weigh, you're going to divide that by 2.2 to get kilograms, and then you will multiply that by 0.8 if you want to get the exact amount. But just speaking in average amounts here, you're needing about 45 to 55 grams of protein per day as an adult.
Great, thanks, Karla. Alrighty. So this next one might also be for you, Karla. Let's see. Are there studies showing the differences in meal participation that increase in high school students or for elementary schools?
I'm assuming that question is relating to participation when plant-based or meatless options are introduced. And certainly in the programs that we have worked with over the years, we have not done specific studies related to this. We do have a handful of case studies that look at not only participation, but financial implications that relate to it as well. And certainly seeing an increase in that. I know that Friends of the Earth has done many other studies as well, and I feel like I'm forgetting a couple others off the top of my head, but can certainly share some follow-up information with the emails that go out to the attendees with that. But certainly, part of what we do and the work that our team does throughout the country is working with institutions individually to ensure that the program is sustainable. And if there are any issues, working to address that, whether through marketing or trying different recipes, and certainly just trying things more often as well, and tasting and sampling. So we're happy to provide any kind of support to programs that may be experiencing challenges or just want to increase the amount of options that they have on their menus that are plant-based.
Thanks, Karla. So this next one, I believe, is for Isaac. Are meat alternative plant-based products really making less of an environmental impact given their highly processed nature?
Yeah, great question. And that goes all the way back sort of to why food is such an environmental problem and why it's such a big environmental solution. So we're used to thinking about energy. And this is true, you know, we go back, the person who was asking about the environmental impact of prawns, right, of aquaculture. We're used to thinking about climate change in terms of energy, because most of our climate emissions come from burning fossil fuels in cars, power plants, and all that kind of stuff. With food, most of the climate change and other environmental impacts come from how we use our land instead of from the energy we use in food. And so even though it does take more energy to process a food than to eat it unprocessed, and that's true for animal products as well as for plant-based products, you know, it takes more energy to have a highly processed hamburger or a highly processed hot dog than it does to have, you know, than just to have the supply chain that takes a slab of fish from one place to another. And that's true for vegetables too. You could have a highly processed vegetable product that's more energy than a bag of raw carrots. But that energy is such a tiny part of the environmental impact of our food that it doesn't actually make a big difference. So most of the climate impacts of the land biodiversity impacts and the water pollution impacts from our food all go back not to how we supply the food, so not how many food miles are involved and not how processed it is, but just what kind of farming it took to make it. So that's really where we see the difference between you know, nuts, grains, legumes, veggies, and animal products, is the actual farming itself for plant-based foods is much lower impact, and that outweighs the processing and the transportation. Unless you're getting like strawberries airlifted from Chile in December. That's maybe the one thing that makes a bigger difference.
Great, thanks, Isaac. This next question is for Ron. How do you plan to promote, or how should an institution plan to promote Meatless Mondays in schools when most are doing remote learning in the fall?
So we actually are in collaboration with the New York City school system right now, talking about this specific issue. What we're trying to do with them is to do more engagement and interactive material so that the students will be learning about the benefits of meatless eating. So a lot of the messages that I shared today in terms of what kind of greenhouse gas emissions are you reducing, how much water are you reducing, those are all going to be offered to them as interactive tools where they can actually integrate them onto their websites or in their social media. The school system in New York, each of the schools kind of runs their own. So depending on what their capabilities are, the hope is that they'll be able to integrate those messages and possibly even develop it as like a learning tool. So we're working with them right now. We don't yet know the outcomes. As everything within the school system, it's still a little bit up in the air, but our hope is that we'll be able to convert a lot of that into digital learning opportunities and messaging. Depending on the menu options that they make available, hopefully Meatless Monday will be continue to be prominent there. Many of you may know that the New York City school system has been serving Meatless Monday for the entire school year, and they do offer vegetarian options every day. So I think to one of the earlier questions in regard to, well, is it worth it to do the Meatless Monday practice? I would say yes, because the intention is that that will eventually extend over into other days of the week. So that's the one thing about our concept is that, you know, the hope is once you get a person started on that weekly Monday cycle, that you'll be able to continue that progress over time. In regard to what we're doing with the schools is really giving them the creative materials according to what they have capacity for. They are doing special mailings and emails to parents. So the hope is that we'll be integrated into that as well, so that they'll sort of have a renewed commitment to maintaining that. And a lot of the parents are seeking out different options to be doing at home during this time. So a lot of the messaging can be really relevant for them. Even turning it into interactive games and things is something that we're hoping that they'll be able to integrate, just depending, again, completely on their capacity, considering how many other things are literally and figuratively on their plates.
Thanks, Ron. So I know we're just a little bit over time, but we do have a few more questions. So we'll just continue going, just a few more questions, and then we'll wrap up today. Karla, I believe these next two questions are for you. One of the questions is, what is the healthiest and most feasible meat alternative?
Well, certainly when thinking about institutional food service, and just if we're talking about plant proteins altogether, and I don't know if I'm understanding this question as it's designed, but probably as you all got from my portion of the presentation, I love beans and legumes. So I would definitely encourage swapping those out. Those are going to be the least expensive, overall healthiest options when thinking about plant proteins in general. And there's so many benefits when it comes to fiber, digestive health, and from an institutional perspective, just cost and ease of sourcing these products are what I would definitely encourage programs to use.
Thanks, Karla. And then the next question, someone had a question about how we do our forward food trainings.
Yeah, so obviously we are all looking at how to pivot the work that we had been doing in the past to more of a virtual platform. So certainly we are working on virtual education and training opportunities. So I would say if that's something that is of interest to you and just learning more about that, to reach out to us directly and we can work with you on that. But we are moving to a virtual platform at this point.
Thanks, Karla. This one, it's not so much of a question, more as a comment, kind of probably more directed towards Isaac. They say, I would love to see a video game in which the player chooses items off the menu and is charged by the carbon required to produce each item. So Isaac, maybe you can develop that in your spare time.
That sounds amazing. I'll have to talk with my gamer friends and see if we can put something together.
All right, so we have just a couple more. This question, I'm not sure who it's directed towards. They say, thank you for all this amazing work and offering it for free. My question is, why has there not been some type of initiative or campaign to specifically target vendors and nutrition directors in the school system to purchase healthy and delicious vegan foods?
Well, I can touch on that, Amanda, and then Ron or Isaac, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that, but we work very closely with different manufacturers that are providing products to school districts, higher education, healthcare, and of those 628 institutions that I mentioned in the very beginning, almost half of those are with school districts. So we do a lot of outreach and work with school districts. And Ron, I know you mentioned New York City Public Schools, working with them as well, as I'm sure you have experience with others too. So that is part of our work.
Yeah, we actually do work with other organizations that serve different school districts as well. One of the companies we work with serves about 95 school districts in the Northeast, and they've really made a huge effort. They actually promote Meatless Monday at all their schools and have offered those menus. So those are integrated. NorCal might be kind of a specific area that we might need to do more development in terms of serving that geography. But I would think that there would be a level of adoption. It's just a matter of getting them introduced to the right people and getting the right advice and implementation in place. we do see that a lot where, you know, a lot of the different products that might be offered can be not always the recommended ones, but that's definitely changing with the commitment that people are making.
Terrific. Thank you both. All right, we have just 2 quick questions left. This one, I believe it may be directed towards Isaac. They asked if you could explain your use of chorizo. Is this a plant-based version of the sausage, or is it a seasoning that is used in the dish?
Good question. I'm not quite sure about the context for that question. So I'm not quite sure how to answer it. I would guess.
I think it's Karla.
Yeah. But I would say in general, if we're talking about ingredient substitutions, we're not just talking about seasoning. So in general, we're talking about replacing the meat texture and the meat in the dish with an entire new plant-based item.
Yeah, and to touch on that, I know in my portion of the presentation did mention a lentil chorizo and then a chickpea chorizo at the end with the cycle menus. And those references would be recipes where it would be more of a seasoning to add that flavor profile to both of those plant-based proteins versus meat analog that resembles a chorizo. So those recipes can be found at our website, forwardfood.org.
Great. And last question, why does the conversation seem to totally skirt the food group of legumes as the #1 plant protein choice? Is this intentional or an oversight?
I'm happy to touch on that. And then Isaac, I think you did speak on legumes as well from an environmental perspective, but by no means did we intend not to talk about it. In fact, a lot of the examples that I shared in my portion were using different beans and legumes to replace animal products. So hopefully I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah, same here. Many of the good plant protein sources that were on the charts that I used and I think that I talked about specifically are legumes. So beans, peas, all those kind of things are really critical. I mean, you're right; they are incredibly important. We love legumes. They're tasty.
Yeah.
They have high protein. They're delicious, and they're environmentally friendly. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and I'll also say we actually have a bunch of creative just around legumes and the power of plant proteins. So it's definitely an area that we focus on and encourage people to use that messaging when they're talking about plant-based meals.
I guess this is maybe a little bit of a tangent from that question, but I will say that if you want to raise a ruckus about legumes, the place to do that is probably with in agricultural research and the people who fund sort of big ag and agricultural research projects, because most of the money in agriculture right now has historically gone to corn and soybeans because they're really, and a little bit to wheat and a little bit to rice, but just because we grow so much of those things, corn breeding and soybean breeding. And there are a lot more farmers, especially now that plant-based alternatives are becoming a bigger deal economically now. There are a lot more farmers who are interested in growing more different pulses and legumes to sell to the people who are making plant-based meat, plant-based milk, and all those different kind of foods. So I know that the Good Food Institute has organized some conferences around that and tried to raise some money to help support farmers who want to do that. And sort of right at the base of the supply chain is where to focus your effort right now. I think a lot of people on the nutrition side and the environmental side are very familiar with how good legumes are. We just need more farmers to grow them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for your incredible questions. And thank you, Karla, Isaac, and Ron for your answers and for the incredible presentations today. I just want to end on this last slide so that everyone in our audience has all 3 of our websites to go to for any additional questions or to find more resources. We have tons of free recipes available at forwardfood.org for colleges and universities, K-12 schools, and healthcare institutions. In addition to a variety of other resources, Meatless Mondays has some incredible resources on their website, and Isaac has some incredible resources on his website. So all 3 of those links are there for you, and we will be following up with a link to download these slides, in addition to a link to view this recording after this webinar. So thank you all again so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed our time with you, and I hope you all have a great rest of your Monday. So with that, I will go ahead and end this webinar. So thank you all again.